Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the introduction to clinical toxicology lectures. The second lecture will cover the topic of pharmacovigilance. As I mentioned in the previous lecture, that the only source of data regarding the clinical impacts of toxic exposures is based on the reported cases of toxicity during the daily use or exposure to chemicals or drugs, because we cannot perform toxicity experiments on humans. Accordingly, monitoring the toxic response or adverse effects of drugs and chemicals is highly recommended to be vigilant about the cases of toxicity. So, pharmacovigilance is the process of monitoring the safety of chemicals, especially medicinal agents, after authorization of safety and performed by official agency that has an authority to take action. So the processes of monitoring and safety of medicinal agents conducted through conduction of process of monitoring the safety of medicinal agents, we can first identify the previously unrecognized adverse drug reactions or effects associated with the clinical use of these drugs, or the change on the pattern of these effects as reported in the preclinical study. Second, the risks and benefits of the drugs or chemicals used for diagnosis, prevention, and treatment of diseases can be determined or monitored by this process, and accordingly the required regulatory action by the health care authority can be established on this basis. The third point is the pharmacovigilance can provide information to optimize safety and effective use of drugs. Number four, for monitoring the impact of the regulatory action, which means that according to the collected data or the reported cases of toxicity or safety concern, the regulatory authority can take an action to modify the use, sometimes removing or withdrawal of the drug or chemical from the market, and then follow up this action in the future. In this regard, many regulatory authorities in different communities are responsible for performing the process of pharmacovigilance. For example, of these regulatory authorities, or the most popular or famous one, for example, in the European Union countries, the European Medicine Agency, or EMA, in association with the competent authorities in the member states of the United Union, are responsible for performing the pharmacovigilance processes as regulatory authorities. Another example is that in the United Kingdom, for example, the Authority of Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency, or very well characterized as MHRA, advisory committees, in addition to the Commission of Human Medicines, or CHM, those are involved in the performing as a regulatory authorities for performing the pharmacovigilance action. In the United States, I think all of us know the rule of the Food and Drug Administration, or the American FDA, as a very well internationally recognized authority that perform or follow the process of pharmacovigilance regarding the safety concerns about the drugs and foods and additives or diagnostic agents. So most of the countries worldwide take an action based on the decision of the Food and Drug Administration, the American Food and Drug Administration in this case. In our country, in Iraq, recently or since about 10 years, the Iraqi Pharmacovigilance Center was established by the Ministry of Health to take an action as a regulatory agency responsible for performing the action of the pharmacovigilance. This center is really not well defined by law, and its action is just to collect data and cannot or have no implanted legislation or law that regulate its action. So this agency nowadays take the responsibility as a regulatory authority. Now the logical questions that may arise in this regard are: what are the type of reactions or effects that should be monitored or reported to through performing the pharmacovigilance? So mostly adverse drug reactions and adverse effects are the actions of chemicals or drugs that are that should be monitored through the pharmacovigilance. So regarding exposure to medicinal agents, we have two terms to describe the unwanted effects, which can be considered as a toxic signs or a toxicity of drugs or chemicals that are used for clinical benefits. So adverse drug reactions are defined as unwanted and harmful reactions experienced following the use of a drug or combination of drugs under normal conditions of use. And the most important thing is that the adverse drug reactions are suspected to be related exclusively to the drug itself, which means that we have a direct evidence for the relationship between the appearance of adverse drug reaction and the drug itself. In the other word, adverse effects can be defined as any undesirable event experienced by a patient while taking a drug, regardless of whether or not the drug is suspected, which means that we have no direct evidence for the relationship between these undesirable events and the use of the drug, just to report an adverse effect and give the types or mention the types of drugs used by the exposed subject to and give the authority or the regulatory authority a chance to determine this relationship. The keyword in both of these conditions, or what the common term or the common relationship between these two terms, is that in both of these conditions the suspected is the keyword is suspected. We have a suspected adverse reaction and suspected effects and suspectedly related to the use of certain drugs, and there's no requirement for proof of association when making reports. This is for the reporting or the subjects involved in reporting the adverse effects, and the final decision about the relationship between the suspected effect and the cause, which means the drugs or chemical, is left to advisory committees of the involved regulatory agency. The activity of pharmacovigilance or reporting unwanted effects of chemicals or drugs include many steps or processes that enable reporting the toxicity cases during the clinical use of medicinal agents. and these include many stages or steps through which these events can be reported. Number one, before authorizing of the clinical use, safety reporting during the pre-approval clinical trial are the first source of toxicity information regarding the unwanted effects of using therapeutic doses of drugs, where fatal or life-threatening adverse reactions or adverse effects should be reported within 7 days of being informed, and all others within 15 days. This is mostly performed after starting the phase of clinical trial to evaluate the safety and efficacy of the drug in the clinical setting. Number two, or second point, that after approval or licensing of the clinical use, the process of providing periodic safety use reports, or what is called PSURS, the periodic safety use reports, is recommended by the regulatory authorities, the EMA, FDA, etc., and should be provided by the healthcare providers using an official forms like the yellow card provided with the BNF. And this is very important to be followed, because sometimes adverse reaction or adverse effects appeared after approval of the drug or after marketing. There are many of these effects may be recognized, especially for a long-term use of these agents. The third step or the third level of reporting the safety concerns are through performing what's called the pharmacoepidemiological studies, where the research centers, universities, or even the manufacturers conduct many studies that follow the incidence or the rate of appearance or emergence of adverse effects or adverse drug reactions through the use of drugs by thousands or millions of people, and support these evidences are important to support the safety and efficacy of the drug after approval or after marketing. As I said in the previous slide, that the adverse reactions or the safety concerns should be reported using a suitable form to the regulatory authorities directly, or to the pharmacovigilance authority of the manufacturer of or any company that market the drug. And we have so many examples about these forms. The most familiar one, as shown in this figure, which shows an example for the official form of reporting suspected adverse reaction to the CHM in the United Kingdom. This form can be found attached with the BNF or accessed online. And as you can see in the first page of the yellow card, it is related to suspected adverse drug reactions. This form includes all the required details regarding the patient details, the type of drugs, the brand name, the active ingredients. For example, the patient details include patient initial, the sex of the gender of the patient, ethnicity, weight of the patient, and age at the time of reaction. Identification number, depending on whether it is reported by the hospital or the clinic, and also include the suspected drugs or vaccines used. For example, the name of brand name and the batch number, route of administration, the dose, the starting date, the date stopped, and prescribed for which kind of disease or disorder. All these notes or informations are vital or very important to find a relationship between the adverse reaction and the drug used or the chemical used. Then the physician or the reporter should describe the suspected reaction. It should briefly describe the reactions and any kind of treatment given, and the outcome of this event, whether it is recovered or under recovering or continuing or any other. And you can follow the other information, which are, as I said before, very important to be considered for a better follow-up or better evaluation of the case. To complete the view of this form or filling the form, the second page of the this reporting sheet include information about the other drugs that are used by the patient, including self-medication, complementary remedies, supplements, etc. So the reporter should, as much as possible, report the list the drugs, vaccines, any medicinal agents or supplements used by the patient, because sometimes the adverse drug reactions or the side effects may appear as a result of drug-drug interaction with other chemicals or materials used by the patient. And also the form include additional relevant information like the medical history, test results, with the presence of allergies or not, and so on. Then we came to the another vital issue, which include the reporter details, which mean name and professional address with physician, pharmacist, dentist, others, postal code, telephone number, email address, specialty, and signature. And when the clinician, if not the reporters, for example, postal code, name of a professional address, telephone number, email, and so on. So this information or this reporting form should be mailed to the authority responsible for collecting and interpreting these data, and accordingly the agency will take an action about take the regulatory action about these events. This figure summarizes the reporting procedure of pharmacovigilance that include providing information to the establish a database regarding the safety of drugs and chemicals, and determining the responsibility of the regulatory authority to analyze this data and take the required action regarding modification of the safety profile or monitoring the compliance of with the new regulation. As you see in the figure, the source of information or the feedback of information to the regulatory authorities come from the number one, the manufacturers during the clinical and post-marketing, the distributors, the companies that distribute or market these drugs, and the healthcare professionals, which can send or give a feedback through either by mailing the form or filling electronic forms through the internet. Now these data are collected through the local centers that perform the pharmacovigilance, and taking in consideration that there is a time limit for reporting these events by the manufacturer. For example, unexpected serious types of reactions should be reported within a time that not exceed 15 days, while the cases of death should be immediately within 24 hours reported to the local centers, while others, which considered mild or not fatal events, should be reported within a time that do not exceed 30 days. And the follow-up should be continued as necessary by the manufacturers. Then, after collection of data at the local centers, the feedback should be sent to the provincial centers if available, and this should be the serious types of events should be reported within a time that not exceed 3 working days, while others within a time that not exceed 15 days. Then all the information will send to the national center, and these national centers are followed by the WHO, the World Health Organization, and there's a cooperation or sharing the information or the feedbacks between the national centers and WHO. This is now become mandatory. And both the national centers and the WHO are responsible for the assessment of the risks of the safety of using these agents. And based on the process of risk assessment, the regulatory authorities like the FDA, EMA, or others, and the WHO are responsible for taking the regulatory action to the community regarding the safety of using these drugs. Now, we should know what are the events that should be reported to the pharmacovigilance authority. For example, drugs and vaccines marketed within an interval with an inverted triangle in the BNF. In the other word, these newly authorized products with no efficient safety reports after authorization. If you go to the BNF, you find certain newly approved drugs are marked with an inverted triangle. This means that this drug, although it is marketed, although the safety is reported in the clinical trial, but there is no information regarding its safety after marketing or used by thousands of people. The second type of reports include serious reactions to established drugs and vaccines, which including the over-the-counter substances and herbal and supplementary medicines. This include fatal, life-threatening, disabling, incapacitating events resulted in or prolonged hospitalization, medically significant and congenital abnormalities produced by the use of these agents. All these events, whether or suspected events, whether they are directly related or indirectly related to the use of the drugs or vaccines or supplementary material, if they are serious, they should be reported directly to the pharmacovigilance authority. Number 3, all adverse reactions in children. All kinds of adverse reaction, whether they are serious or mild or even not related directly to the use of certain kinds of chemicals or drugs. And moreover, we have certain kinds of adverse effects or adverse reactions which does not appear during the acute use of drugs or during the short-term use of drugs or chemicals. Sometimes these effects are shown a delayed pattern. They appeared after months, weeks, or years after using the drug. So all suspecting delayed drugs effects should be reported also or considered as an adverse reactions or adverse events that should be reported to the pharmacovigilance authority. As I mentioned in the early in the lecture, that the one of the stages where pharmacovigilance data are collected or provided are the performing the pharmacoepidemiological studies, and we should know the nature of these epidemiological studies. We have two types of pharmacoepidemiological studies. Number one, we have what is called what are called the case control studies, which they include a large prescription based databases. For example, clinical practice research data link, which can be used to compare adverse events rates in patients exposed definitely versus controls which are not using these agents. Where more robust design than cohort studies, this include more robust design schedule than cohort studies, but generally more expensive. The second type of these studies is the cohort studies, which include groups of patients already receiving a drug and attempt to evaluate the toxicity, and in this case we do not need a control group. That's why they are more easy to be performed and less expensive than the former one. Now, after collection of the pharmacovigilance data in the pharmacovigilance center of the regulatory agency, and after a thorough evaluation by specialized committees and analysis of the reported events, the regulatory actions taken by the represented authority include many types. Number one, the regulatory authority may change the warnings reported in the product information leaflets. Either may increase the warnings or limit the warnings or modify the warnings of using this drug. The second, the regulatory authority may restrict the indications for the use. For example, if we have a marketed drug that have many indications, and as a result of the pharmacovigilance evaluation of the data, these indications may be limited or restricted to a few one or to one single indication based on the safety data. Number three, the regulatory authority may change the specified dose of the drug, because sometimes the doses or the therapeutic doses reported in the preclinical and the clinical stages may found to cause adverse reactions in the community that may reach a level that need using doses lower than the indicated one. All these changes should be mentioned in the product information leaflet or in the updated product information leaflet. That's why these leaflets are continuously updated by the manufacturer. Number four, the regulatory authorities, after thorough evaluation of the data, may change the legal status of the marketed drug. For example, it may be changed from over-the-counter medication to prescription-only medication because of the raised safety concern, which means that the use of this agent should be restricted to the follow-up of the physician or the clinician. Finally, the regulatory agency may decide to remove the medicinal product from the markets, and this kind of decision is based on finding that the risks of using these agents overweight its clinical benefits. After taking one or considering one of the regulatory actions mentioned in the last slide, these actions are forwarded to the healthcare professional, to all healthcare professionals, including hospitals, medical centers, private clinics, physicians, dentists, pharmacists, all those involved in the healthcare providing processes, or sometimes are delivered to the public through the media, and the forwarding these information to those who concerned is performed by, number one, they are either posted as letters to all physicians and or registered physicians and pharmacists, dentists, or any healthcare providers. Second, through the electronic cascade highlighting the urgent warning through the internet or through the media. Number three, through publication in the monthly bulletin, for example, drug safety updates or any medical journal that concerned about the safety use of drugs or chemicals. Number four, through publication on the agency on the websites or hard copies of these publication by MHRA, IMA, FDA, etc., published in the website and be available for the public and for the whole healthcare professionals. Thank you.